G'day and welcome to the Manage Self, Lead Others podcast, mainly for experienced and aspiring people managers. I'm your host, Nina Sunday. This is the show to help you explore ways to become the best version of yourself at work as a manager. Each episode, you'll hear from some of the brightest business minds on the planet who share your passion to elevate and transform team culture. They share insights in self-leadership and leading others. Together, we can make workplace culture better. Are you ready? Because it's time to manage self, lead others. With a bachelor's degree in economics and an MBA, Matt Lovegrove is a partner with EY's People Advisory Services, focusing on talent development, deployment and retention. A former chair of APMP Australia, the Association for Professionals Winning Business through Proposals, Bids and Business Development, Matt is an expert in strategic account management. In this episode, we're going to discuss the EY Work Reimagined Employer Survey 2021, how are companies redefining work with humans at the centre. Welcome, Matt Lovegrove.
Thank you, Nina. Great to be with you again.
My pleasure. And EY has recently published the Work Reimagined Survey 2021, which was conducted in March 2021 with over 16,000 responses from 16 countries, and with the majority mainly coming from millennials. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's a sign of the stratification of the workforce, Nina. But it was the majority, but we had a nice representation of Gen Xers like myself, even baby boomers and those before it. But yeah, the majority were from millennials.
Very good. So the subtitle was How Are Companies Redefining Work with Humans at the Centre? So what would you say was probably the highlighted key finding out of the survey?
Yeah, and just for a little bit of extra context, Nina, we surveyed employees and then we most recently surveyed employers because we were very keen to understand, whether there was differences in intent, in ideals around work. And the overarching message was, I think positively, that it was fairly aligned. And the key message that came out of it was that the idea of flexible working is here to stay. I've been using the phrase that the genie is out of the bottle. The genie's not going back in the bottle. People have had the ability to work flexibly now. Unfortunately, through a terrible situation through the pandemic. But what we've seen is once people have had that experience of some form of flexibility, they're saying they don't want to give that up. Or in fact, 9 out of 10 employees are saying they want to continue to work with some form of flexibility, which is an amazingly high number. Now, we were interested then to see from an employer's perspective whether that aligned. And look, pleasingly, our research showed that 8 out of 10 employers actually agreed that flexibility would need to be an ongoing feature of work. So that element is nicely aligned in that for the majority, the vast majority, some form of flexibility be maintained.
But there is that percentage that have decided they're going to mandate that people come back to work full time. And is this sort of the reason for this great resignation that's on the horizon?
Really, really good point. So when we asked employees, what would you do if your employer said, well, it's been great that you've been able to work on the couch in your tracksuit pants and your Ugg boots, but we now want you back in the office. What would you do? And that was quite a surprise to us, or a significant surprise. 54% of employees said they'd be willing to resign and leave that organization. Now, as you said, there's been a lot that's been written recently about this trend, the Great Resignation. 4 million US workers have been resigning month on month over the last couple of months, the highest since that stat had been recorded. And we're seeing a similar trend in Australia. So the intention was clear. And look, you're right. That was the one area where there is a bit of a disconnect. So 35% of employers said, look, it's been interesting, but we want to go back to normal. And so, yes, there is a real tension that is developing between employees who say, look, I don't want to necessarily work from home or remotely 5 days a week, but I want to do it 2 or 3 days a week. And as you said, there's a relatively significant amount of employers, 35%, who are saying, no, we want you to come back.
And if only 10% of people do want to work full-time in the office, that 35% have to find their new hires from that smaller pool of 10%.
Yeah,
it's
exactly
a bit
right.
silly, isn't it?
Exactly right. And and there's these other macroeconomic impacts as well, right? So we've got our borders at the moment are closed. So in Australia, our reliance on skilled migration has been cut off. And I was listening to ABC radio this morning, and they're talking to one business, and he said he's currently got 100 open roles that he can't fill. So yeah, your point is well made, which is, again, I guess I want to be clear. We're not saying that everyone should move to a hybrid model. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
But you have to consider the impacts of that flexibility or lack of. And so, yeah, to your point, I think what employers are seeing now is that the need for flexibility is high on the list of people's priorities if they're looking to move organizations. So as I've been saying to clients, this represents an opportunity and a threat, right? If you're not willing to entertain some form of flexibility, then that's your prerogative. But be aware that you might start to lose talent. And I guess if you're in the market for talent, make sure that if you've decided to offer flexibility, that you're promoting it. It's amazing how many people I've spoken to have said, but we've offered flexible working practices for the last 5 years. This is not new. But I said, well, go and have a look at your people page on your public website. There's no mention of flexibility. So, it is a case of making sure that people are communicating this, to the market as well.
Absolutely. So there are findings around the company office environment and how it supports collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think even at EY we're a great example. We had mixed use in the office. We had enclosed meeting rooms that you could go and hold a meeting in or collaborate with clients. But the vast majority of our floor space, I must say, was individual working spaces. And so for us now, EY has taken an approach that is we're allowing people to make their own choices around where they work and to make choices based on client need and the needs of your team. So we've been going through quite a transformation in our office space, Nina, where we're removing a significant amount of those individual working spaces and saying, if you need to do that, do it from home, do it from the client location, do it from a cafe. And we're reclaiming that space for more of those collaboration environments. And so our view is the office needs to be that connecting point. It's not a place, and I'm using broad generalizations here, but it's not a place to sort of, commute in, sit down, unpack your bag, sit at one desk, work away by yourself, and then go home. We're saying that doesn't really make as much sense these days. But having space for client work, for teams to collaborate, for learning and development, that's what we're turning the office space into. So our survey supported that, not just from our perspective, but a number of organizations are looking at changing the balance of how office space is used. And then overwhelmingly, 65% have said they're investing in new forms of technology to better enable that hybrid working environment and more collaboration. So things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or improved, electronic whiteboards, those sorts of tools that will enable people to, when they come into the office, to have a really positive experience in working with others.
So does that suggest if they do want a desk for themselves, it'll be hot desking?
Well, again, that's the approach that we've taken at EY. Absolutely. So, again, we're not saying you can't do that. There are reasons why some people need to do that. They might be living in a shared house. Their home environment might not be conducive to work. So we've got to be conscious of that. But yes, the concept of hot desking, which again, it's been in favor and out of favor and potentially back out of favor again, Nina. But yeah, the idea of hot desking is the way that we're going. And using tools that enable you to find people in the offices. So not only why we obviously have quite large office environments. So the idea of being able to look up and say, okay, well, I want to know when Nina is planning to come into the office and where she's planning to work, so that if I need to be maybe not, in a room full-time collaborating with you, but I need to be near you, you can do that. So there's some interesting technology that's come into play now to create that ability to find people and to optimally plan amongst teams which location and when they might be able to come together. Right.
And of course, this whole online environment does mean that we can collaborate across geography and across time zones. So is that a mixed blessing? Is that both good and bad?
Yeah, I think you know the answer to that question, Lena, already. Yeah, look, it absolutely is a positive, and I think I've been saying from a talent acquisition perspective, looking for new people, put the tax implications aside for 1 second. But I was saying to someone, does it really matter in some roles whether you're hiring someone in Hobart or Helsinki? And for some roles and organizations, it doesn't. So that's a big opportunity to now start to attract people, that you would never have thought about potentially employing. Or if you did, you might have in the past said, well, we'll hire you, but you need to move from Helsinki to Hobart to come and work for us. So that's a benefit. But look, where you're going, I guess, is the issue of productivity and well-being. So the negative of some of these tools and approaches to work is that, some people feel the need to extend their work hours, to be available, normal working hours in their own geography, but then be available for other locations to contact. And it is in many cases it is generating negative impacts on well-being. So absolutely, there is a need to get this balance right so that people can manage that. And so again, to me, absolutely that piece goes to the heart of flexibility of when you work. So if today, for example, I needed to spend more time talking to my American colleagues, then I would start earlier in the morning, but I would be very purposeful about saying, but I'm going to be switching off at 3:00 my local time, because that will be a full day. The issue is when people feel they can't do that, or they're not empowered to do that, or the corporate culture doesn't do that. Then yes, absolutely. I think there's a real, not I think there is a real risk of burnout and negative impacts on people's well-being. And that to me again comes down, that comes down to then the investment that organizations need to make in leadership and management and understanding how to make this work.
And it's so interesting that I think when people started working from home, and even before that, employees didn't trust that people would actually work, and in fact they're working longer and harder and we have to make sure they don't overwork and suffer burnout. So isn't that interesting?
Exactly, and it's a really good point, because there are still people that in their heart of hearts believe that that's an issue, and I guess my view on that is that. I don't believe that people change their inherent natures that dramatically. So I said to one person who was really concerned, I said, well, if you felt that person was going to be playing golf or slacking off at home, do you not think that if they're in the office, they're probably playing solitaire or on eBay or updating Facebook? Like, if you're looking if you're looking for ways not to work, you'll find it in any environment. So yeah, you're right. And then the data does back it up, Nina. There's lots of tools are available, and in general, and again, it's often dangerous to generalize, but yeah, the data that I've seen, and even our own data at EY, is that work weeks have expanded. The amount of hours people are working has expanded. So we have to make sure that we're balancing that out. And EY has been fantastic. We recently had a whole of firm unplugged day. So all of Australia and New Zealand were given a full day off of extra annual leave, where everyone was asked to, just do whatever they needed to do to recharge and look after their well-being. So, EY is very progressive in that space, but all organizations need to be thinking about those sorts of ways to help people get balance.
I love the sound of that, an unplugged day, a digital detox day.
Exactly. Because some people will take a day off, and that's fine, they need to. But there's always in the back of your mind, if everyone else is working, that there's emails piling up or the phone might ring. Whereas the beauty of the whole firm being unplugged was, that very few people are going to be, emailing you or calling you. And interestingly as well, our clients, we obviously communicated that with our clients, and they were overwhelmingly supportive of it and embraced it and said, what a great idea. And we might look to do something similar.
That makes EY absolute trailblazers when it comes to work-life balance and a productive work environment. Congratulations.
Well, it's obviously it's all of our leadership, and it is a great place to work, and it's it really means that we're walking the talk around this as well.
Now, the study brought up a bit of a mismatch around culture, where 72% of employees believe that workplace culture has improved since the onset of the pandemic, compared to 48% of employees, or the respondents to the survey. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. What can you say to that?
Look, I do find that interesting. So as you said, I mean, the employer response was overwhelmingly positive. Now, the 48% of employees might sound small, but it was actually the largest. It was the largest grouping. So some said it stayed the same. It was a relatively small percentage that said it had gotten worse. So yeah, look, I don't know how much we can read into that, Nina, except maybe there's an inbuilt positive bias from the employer's perspective to culture, and the surveys were done at different periods of time. So I think there's also that to be considered. Of the employee research was done at the beginning of the year, and our employer research was just completed recently. So again, there might be a time lag, but look, I think it just comes back to your experience of culture and what's happening there. But there's no doubt that that remains a concern, though, for both parties. So it's not that employers are saying, no, everything's great, we don't need to worry about that. Maintaining culture, developing culture, driving creativity is one of the top 5 challenges that employers have said they are concerned about as we design and sort of iterate and refine this new flexible working environment.
In my experience, and certainly even my experience when I was a poor leader, a poor manager, and learned to become a better manager, is that I would assume on the surface that everything was fine, but unless I was doing one-on-ones with my people, they wouldn't tell me what they were really thinking. And do you think that could be the reason why employers believe culture has improved? Because they're not really getting down to these intimate one-on-one conversations where people feel psychologically safe to say what they really think.
I would say absolutely. I mean, I think, again, and if you look at the people that responded to our employer survey, they were quite senior people. 45% were in the C-suite, 41% were directors, and the remainders were sort of at that direct report to CEOs. So without sounding rude, I think you're right. There's potentially an element of an echo chamber happening, amongst that group. But that is the point you make is a really, really good one as well, which is one of the things that we recommend that clients do is actually look at the amount of time that their managers and leaders are spending one-on-one with people. And so again, there's some fantastic tools these days that enable you to track that, because again, completely agree. And so, for example, and I'm not promoting this, but we do use the Microsoft Viva suite, which has a whole range of analytics that it's everyone thinks automatically Big Brother, but it's anonymized. It only goes down to a work group level. But what it can tell us is whether there are some managers that have not been spending one-on-one time with their people as much as we'd like. And all it does is look at, the diary entries in their calendar or the phone calls or chat messages that they've had. So again, we don't use it as a stick. We use it as a positive prompt. Back to your point, Nina, that might
say,
a nudge. Yeah, exactly. So for example, it might be, hey, Matt, look, I know you're really busy, but we've just noticed you haven't been connecting much with Nina lately. It's probably a good idea to do that.
There's the other finding that I discovered is that with planning, there's a percentage of companies that are planning now. Some are actioned and already, ready to apply these plans. And some companies are just waiting to see what other people are doing and aren't doing any planning at all. So what's the lesson around planning for post-pandemic?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point, Nina. And I think that's the one that, again, really stood out for me, is that the pace of change seems to be mismatched. So employees are saying that they really need to have clarity and be given that direction around the intention of the organization when it comes to how they will be working. Now, as you said, what we've seen is that 40% of the employer respondents said they've either already actioned their plans or they're imminently about to action it. 43% said they're still working through it. And to your point, 17% are watching and waiting. Now, again, I don't think that should be seen as a negative. I mean, one of the largest groups that were in that watching and waiting category were industries that were actually essential or are essential services. Right. So in some ways for them, life has continued fairly normally. If you're a firefighter, a health worker,
you have to turn up. You can't work from home.
It's very hard to do triage of a patient. It's not impossible, but very hard to do triage on a camera, right?
Yeah.
So I think in fairness, there are some industries that haven't had the option of thinking about moving to different operating modes, and so therefore the watch and wait category for them might be valid. But yeah, look, there are though, and I won't let them off the hook. There are a number of other organisations that still haven't moved, and I think the threat again is that employees are saying, if you're not clear on what you're planning to do, I'm going to start to think about moving to an organisation that has clarity. Right. And so the message I guess I take out of that is, for those who are either thinking or about to start action, excuse the phrase, but for the love of God, please tell your people. Because a lot of people in our survey actually said, we've done some thinking, we've done some design work, but when we asked them whether they've communicated that to their employees, the answer was no. And so again, there's a real risk that people, again, will assume that no news is actually not good news. And if I'm not hearing from my leadership and my managers around where the organization is heading, even if it's just principles and guiding or guide rails, then I think there is a real risk that people will vote with their feet, as we said earlier, and look to other organisations.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Matt. No news is bad news when it comes to if you're working in an organisation, because we've run our own toxic behaviour survey listing about 11 different behaviours, and the one that came top of the list was withholding of information. And so people feel like they're in the dark and they start making up their own stories, and they're inferring from cues that they see around the place. And it's such a mistake. The employers, I suppose they think, well, our plans aren't fully formulated, so we have to wait till we've got a fully formulated plan. But then, that suggests they're not taking on board the suggestions coming from their people.
Spot on. And the extension of that is, if you don't involve your people and you don't engage them, whether it's in the form of some sort of survey like we've done at a company level, then we've also seen some people that have moved down paths with the best intentions, but implemented policies like subsidizing transport, for example, or introducing catering in the corporate offices, which again, well intentioned, but in our research we asked a whole range of those sort of deep diving questions around what will you value most. Both of those things actually came down pretty low on the priority list. So you run the risk of best intentions, a lot of work done, rolling out this new approach, and people saying, well, that's not really what I was after. So that would probably, quite frankly, that's probably as bad as, if not worse, than not doing anything. So yeah, the message out of this for me is engage your people. They want to be engaged. They want to work through this with the organization. And to your point, we're seeing organizations implement, little proofs of concept, right? So choosing a particular division or a location or a function and saying, this is where we think we're heading. Would you be up to trialing this new approach? And then we'll get your feedback and we'll tweak it. We'll move forward. So there are ways to do it. And again, I completely agree with you. The lack of communication, I think, is a fatal flaw.
Now, we're sort of coming to the end of our conversation. It's always so fascinating talking with you, Matt. And this survey is just outstanding. I mean, outstanding with its method and the results. There was one risk that came up, that the largest proportion, 42%, believe that developing next generation talent is the risk they are most concerned about. These are employers, right? Yes. They're most concerned about developing next generation talent. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, and again, a legitimate risk. So in many organizations, ourselves included, we have, I guess, the apprenticeship model. So you come into a firm like EY. For many people, after graduating from uni, and you work with a range of different people, and it's an observe, do, develop type approach. So one concern that people have is that if it's a more hybrid or remote working environment, how do I create those opportunities for people to learn on the job? Now, I think there's a couple of elements to unpack there. These things are always complex, as you know, Nina. But one of the elements of that is that the approach to learning and development is going to change, and it's already started to change. And again, a key insight out of the employer research was that, which was really great, it was almost universal agreement that the approach to learning and skills development has to change. So we're seeing, again, a move to more virtual offerings around learning. Self-paced, self-directed is another big piece as well. But not to say that the experience part is not important. It really is. So we're seeing employers looking for more ways to boost and be mindful, I guess, or make conscious decisions about including people in a broader range of activities. And when that the flip side of that is this idea of proximity bias, I think is the term that I've been using, whereby if I'm not around you, if I don't see you, I might overlook you for experiential opportunities, or I might overlook you for learning and development. So I think they're the two key concerns that I've heard coming back from the clients I've spoken to. One is, how do we create a better experience and the ability to be that apprentice in this new world? And there's again, tools that we can use, engagement methods we can use. And then the second part is, how do I make sure my managers are thinking about their entire team, not just the people that are immediately in front of them? So if I'm one of those people that prefers to go back to the office, there will be people around me that will be in the office, but I may also have a significant proportion of my team that's working remotely. So making sure that I'm not keeping on going to the same people because they're in line of sight, for opportunities is going to be really important.
Just in closing, talking about visibility and invisibility, the people that are working from home, are there some easy ways that they can make sure they make the work that they're doing more visible to their immediate manager?
Yes. Look, and again, and it's interesting when you look at this across cultures as well, because there's very different approaches to this. Look, it's a really good point. I think, again, going back to the psychological safety piece and the one-on-ones with managers, making sure that if your manager is not engaging with you, that you take the opportunity to do that and to provide them with a view of what you've been working on, the output you've delivered, in a more purposeful way, I guess I'd say. So it's almost inverting the relationship. Often in performance management, the manager would come prepared with, all your statistics and what you've done, and we'll talk through it. I'm suggesting in a hybrid world, not that will disappear completely, but the employee has to take some level of ownership, to make sure that happens. And then be visible for opportunities outside of work. So again, at EY, we've instituted, we call it coffee roulette, where people get randomly paired up with somebody else virtually, literally just to take a coffee break and have a chat, introduce yourself. Being involved in those sort of things, being involved in team meetings and not sitting there with your camera off. I mean, these are very tactical things, but
Yes, that's such a basic one, and people are not realizing the subconscious message that's sending.
Exactly right. Now, they're probably working really hard. They're probably listening intently. But yeah, you're right. Most people think, that maybe they're not there. Now, again, people need time off from the camera. We talk about cognitive overload, but again, in certain environments, making sure that you're visible. So I think, again, my summary there, don't mean to waffle, Nina. I think the summary is, employees need to be a little bit more assertive, be a little bit more confident in reaching out to their manager and sharing what they're doing and being visible, rather than it, sort of waiting for that to come to them.
And just before you go, can you tell me a little bit more how coffee roulette works? Sounds interesting.
Yeah, sure. No, look, again, it was a great idea, relatively simple, but as it sounds, literally we just tipped all of our people's names into a virtual hat, and we said, look, at least once a week or twice a week, depending on what you wanted to do, you would get sent the name of a fellow colleague in your geography. So we made it geography based, and you may or may not know them, but the idea is to put time in your diary, make a cup of tea or coffee, and have a chat with this person. Ideally, not about work.
Right.
Ideally.
Oh, I love the sound of this.
Yeah, and again, it was for a number of reasons. One, to enable opportunities to feel connected, to try to recreate the great North American saying of the water cooler moments, right? But as I said, so A, to make sure that people are being connected, and then B, it's an opportunity to actually expand your network from a work perspective as well. So it's something that we started off, almost immediately after the pandemic hit, and it's continued on, I'm glad to say. And for those people who are involved in it, it just makes a difference to them to know that's coming up, to speak to someone they might not normally speak to. And just have another connection outside of the four walls they might be working in.
And it only has to be 10 or 15 minutes, is that right?
Correct, 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes. That's fabulous. And it's an opportunity to network. If you have, it could even be a mentoring opportunity that comes out of that. And also it can overcome the silo effect with that sort of us and them mentality. That's a marvelous tactic. I love it. Well, look, a very rich conversation today, Matt. I really appreciate your time. I also appreciate EY for providing such a rich study that has global implications that everybody can benefit from. So congratulations to EY as well, and you as one of the partners. Well done.
Thanks, Nina. Look, it's always great to talk to you. We have covered a lot of ground, which has been great. And the studies are available to anyone who wants to read them. And again, to your point, there's some really interesting and great thinking has gone in from our clients, our respondents as well. So appreciate your time, Nina, and it's been great to talk.
Oh, yes, I meant to ask you, is there a specific web address that they can find it?
Yes.
Googling.
Yeah, no, look, why don't I, if it's okay, I'll send that to you and you might be able to include that.
I'll include it in the show notes, yeah. Great. Thanks very much. Thanks,
Nina.
This episode, we've been speaking with Matt Lovegrove on the Manage Self Lead Others podcast for experienced and aspiring people managers. I'm your host, Nina Sunday. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. I meet people all the time who say they listen and they found it because someone told them it's a good show to listen to. And come back every week. We interview people who share insights on how to elevate and transform team culture. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter. Let me know that you're listening. Until next time, ciao for now.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.